Listen closely because this is a story about the kind of moment that divides your life into before and after, the kind of moment where everything you thought you knew about the world shifts just slightly, and suddenly you realize that miracles aren't always loud and dramatic. Sometimes they sound like a phone ringing in the dark. Sometimes they look like a stranger who has absolutely no reason to care, deciding to care anyway. This story begins with the sound of porcelain shattering against a kitchen floor. It was late on a Thursday night in South Philadelphia, in a small apartment above a shop that used to sell electronics, but had been closed for years. The kind of place where the radiator clangs too loud and the walls are thin enough to hear your neighbors' conversations. The kind of place where people work hard just to stay afloat, where every dollar is counted twice, and where hope sometimes feels like a luxury you can't quite afford. 7-year-old Lily Chen was in her room, coloring a picture of a rainbow. Her stuffed panda sat beside her, watching over her work with its button eyes. In the kitchen, her mother Maria was making tea, chamomile, the kind that's supposed to help you relax after working 2 shifts in one day. Maria was tired, more than tired. She was exhausted in a way that goes bone deep, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying the weight of the world on shoulders that were never meant to bear it alone. And then it happened. The dizziness hit her like a wave. The room tilted. Her knees gave out. The cup slipped from her hands, and porcelain exploded across the floor in 100 sharp pieces. Maria's head struck the cabinet on the way down, and then there was nothing but silence and the thin line of blood tracing its way behind her ear. Lily heard the crash. She dropped her crayon, it was purple, her favorite color, and ran to the kitchen doorway. What she saw there would stay with her forever. Her mother, the strongest person she knew, the person who held their whole world together, lying motionless on the cold kitchen floor. One arm stretched across a puddle of spilled tea, steam still rising from the broken cup like a ghost. For a moment, time stopped. For a moment, Lily couldn't breathe. But then she remembered. Her mother had told her more than once what to do if something ever went wrong. If anything happens to me, baby, you call Uncle Thomas, okay? He'll help us. Lily didn't scream. She didn't fall apart. With trembling hands and a racing heart, she climbed onto the kitchen counter, something she normally wasn't allowed to do, and grabbed her mother's phone from the charging station. Her fingers were ice cold. Her vision was blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Not yet. She had to be strong. She had to be brave like her mama always told her to be. She scrolled through the contacts, looking for Uncle Thomas's name. But her hands were shaking so badly, and when she pressed the call button, she hit the wrong number, just 1 digit off. Such a small mistake, such a tiny error. But sometimes the smallest mistakes lead to the biggest miracles. The phone rang once, twice, then it connected. A man's voice came through the speaker, calm, low, steady as a heartbeat. The kind of voice that doesn't panic, that doesn't rush, that makes you feel like maybe, just maybe, everything might be okay. Hello? Lily's voice was small and frightened, but she pushed the words out anyway. I'm sorry, is this Thomas? A pause. No. And right there, Lily could have hung up. She could have tried again, dialed the right number, but something in that voice made her keep talking. Something told her that whoever this stranger was, he would listen. I need help, she said, and now the tears were coming, hot and fast down her cheeks. My mom fell down. She's bleeding from her head. She won't wake up. Please, please, someone has to come. Please. Static crackled on the line for just a second, and then the voice came back, and it was different now. Focused, sharp, but still calm, still steady. Where are you? On the other end of that phone call, standing barefoot on the cold marble floor of his downtown penthouse, was a man named Marcus Bennett. Behind him, through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of Philadelphia glittered like a million tiny stars that had fallen to earth. Marcus was wealthy, very wealthy, the kind of wealthy that most people only see in movies. He lived 40 floors above the streets where real people lived their real lives. He ran a tech company that was worth more money than most people could imagine. He had everything that society tells us we're supposed to want. And he was standing there alone in the dark, wondering when his life had become so empty. Then his phone rang, and a little girl's voice changed everything. "Where are you?" he asked again, his mind already shifting into action mode. Lily tried to think. Street names, her mother had taught her some, but in her panic, they all scattered like leaves in the wind. "I don't know the exact street," she said, her voice breaking, "but we live above Charlie's Electronics. There's a blue door out front. Apartment 2C. It was enough. More than enough. Marcus didn't ask her to hold on while he called 911. He didn't tell her to wait for an ambulance. He didn't think about liability or lawyers or any of the careful, cautious things that wealthy people are supposed to think about. He just grabbed his coat, snatched his car keys from the counter, and ran for the elevator. Because sometimes when someone needs help, thinking is the enemy of action. Sometimes you just have to move. 13 minutes later, and Marcus would remember later that he'd driven faster than he'd ever driven in his life. His black Mercedes SUV screeched to a stop in front of a building that looked like it was barely holding itself together. The paint was peeling, the windows were old and drafty, and there, at the top of 3 concrete steps covered in patches of old ice, was a blue door. Marcus took those steps 2 at a time. Inside, the building smelled like decades of life compressed into narrow hallways. Cooking spices, old radiator steam, dust, and that particular scent of poverty that isn't about dirt, but about things wearing out and never being replaced. Apartment 2C had its door open just a crack, maybe an inch, like it was waiting for him. He knocked once, firm but not frightening. The door creaked open wider, and there she was. Lily, small and scared, her socks soaked through with spilled tea, clutching her mother's phone like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Her eyes were wide, but there was something remarkable in them. Not just fear, but determination. This little girl had made the hardest call of her life, and she'd done it. "You came," she whispered, and there was wonder in her voice, like she couldn't quite believe that a stranger would actually show up. "I did," Marcus said simply. She stepped back, and he entered the apartment. It was small but clean, tidy. A basket of neatly folded laundry sat in one corner. Soup was still simmering on the stove. Someone had been making dinner. A calendar hung on the refrigerator with 3 dates circled in red marker. Bills, probably. Due dates that someone was trying hard not to miss. This was a home. Not much, maybe, but a home filled with love and effort and someone who was trying their very best. And there, on the kitchen floor, was Maria. Marcus knelt beside her immediately. He checked her breathing, shallow but steady. Her pulse weak but there. Her face was pale, far too pale, and when he gently touched the back of her head, his fingers came away with blood. Concussion, certainly. Dehydration, probably. Maybe something worse. She needed a hospital, and she needed it now. Not in 20 minutes when an ambulance might arrive. Now. Without hesitation, without thinking about whether it was appropriate or proper or careful, Marcus slipped his arms beneath Maria and lifted her. She was light, too light, the kind of light that told a story about someone who skipped meals so their child wouldn't have to. Someone who worked herself to exhaustion so a little girl could have school supplies and warm clothes and a safe place to sleep. "Goat," he said gently to Lily. The little girl grabbed her jacket without question and followed him out the door. Down the stairs, through the cold night air, into the warm SUV where Marcus turned the heat up as high as it would go. Lily climbed into the back seat and sat beside her mother, and Marcus drove. He drove like her life depended on it, because it did. At the second red light, and Marcus remembered this moment with perfect clarity for the rest of his life, Lily spoke. Her voice was small but clear in the quiet of the car. "You're not Thomas." Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "No. Are you a doctor?" "No." She thought about this for a moment, and then she said something that hit Marcus right in the center of his chest, in a place he'd forgotten existed. "You came anyway." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he looked at her in the mirror, this brave, remarkable little girl who had held everything together when her world was falling apart, and he made a promise he had no right to make. "She's going to be okay." "You promise?" Lily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I do." He didn't know if it was true. He couldn't guarantee it. But in that moment, it felt like the only truth that mattered. Sometimes faith isn't about knowing. Sometimes it's just about choosing to believe. At the emergency room entrance, Marcus didn't wait for protocol or procedures or permission. He carried Maria straight through the automatic doors, past a tired clerk at the check-in desk who started to protest, past the waiting area filled with sick people and scared families, and directly into the trauma bay where nurses and doctors were preparing for the night shift. "I'm not leaving her in the hallway," he said simply when security approached. And something in his voice, something in the way he stood there holding this woman like she was precious, like she mattered, made them step aside. They took Maria, they got her on a gurney, they started checking vitals and asking questions, and Marcus finally let himself breathe. While the medical staff worked on Maria, Marcus sat in the waiting area with Lily curled up beside him on a vinyl bench that had probably seen 1,000 worried families. She still had her jacket zipped all the way up to her chin, even though the hospital was warm. Marcus got her a bottle of water from the vending machine. She held it without drinking, her small hands wrapped around its warmth. "Is she your mom?" Marcus asked gently. Lily nodded, not taking her eyes off the double doors where they'd taken Maria. "She works a lot, 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. "You hungry?" he asked. She shook her head. "She'd want me to stay right here." So they stayed. This powerful businessman who could have been anywhere else in the world, and this 7-year-old girl who had somehow become the bravest person he'd ever met. They sat together in silence, waiting. Half an hour later, a nurse came out. Her scrubs had cartoon characters on them, bright and cheerful, almost absurd in the harsh fluorescent lighting. But her smile was real. "She's stable," the nurse said, and Lily's whole body sagged with relief. Concussion, severe dehydration, exhaustion, but no internal bleeding. Her body just gave out. She pushed herself too far for too long. The nurse looked at Marcus. "She'll wake up soon. You can go see her if you'd like." Lily looked up at Marcus with those wide-eyed, hopeful eyes. "Will you come too?" He paused. He'd done what he came to do. He'd saved her. He could leave now, go back to his penthouse, back to his empty life. But instead he heard himself say, "If you want me to." So they went together, this stranger and this child, to see a woman neither of them had known just hours before. Maria's first sensation when she woke up was pain. A dull, throbbing ache in her temple that pulsed with every heartbeat. Her throat felt like sandpaper. Her body was stiff and heavy. She turned her head carefully and saw him, a man sitting quietly in the corner of her hospital room. Not a doctor, not anyone she recognized. Panic flared hot and sudden. She sat up too fast and the IV line in her hand tugged painfully. Who are you?" The man stood calmly. His voice was low and somehow reassuring. "Careful, you hit your head pretty hard when you fell." Maria stared at him, her mind scrambling to piece together fragments of memory. The kitchen, the dizziness, the floor rushing up to meet her. Then nothing. "There was a phone call," the man said, reading the confusion on her face. "From your daughter. She said you'd fallen. I brought you here." The memory crashed over her like a wave. "Wait," Lily called. Her eyes went wide. "Oh God, I must have told her to call Thomas. He's our neighbor. She must have dialed wrong." The man nodded once. "She was scared, but she did exactly what needed to be done. She saved your life." Tears sprang to Maria's eyes. Her baby, her 7-year-old baby had handled all of this alone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for coming, for helping her, for helping me." Something changed in the man's expression. Something subtle but real. A slight loosening of his shoulders, like he'd been holding himself rigid and could finally relax. "You were bleeding. I didn't think twice. I just drove." Maria looked up at him, really looked at him. Expensive coat, confident bearing, but kind eyes, eyes that had seen something, lost something, knew something about pain. "You didn't call an ambulance," she said. "I didn't have time to wait," he replied. "I was closer." He paused and his voice dropped, became something more vulnerable. "And I know what it's like to wish someone would show up when you need them most, and have no one come." Maria didn't ask what he meant. Some stories you can hear in a person's voice, in the spaces between their words. A soft knock interrupted the moment, and then Lily was there, peeking around the door, still holding her stuffed panda. When she saw her mother awake and sitting up, she ran forward with her arms wide open. Mama! Maria pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her small, warm body against her own and thinking, we're okay. We're going to be okay. Lily pulled back just enough to look at the stranger, then back at her mother. He came really fast, Mama, just like in the movies. His car was so shiny and loud. Maria managed a weak laugh. Then she looked up at the man who had saved them both. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. Marcus, he said simply. Marcus Bennett. The name triggered something in Maria's memory. She'd heard it somewhere before. But before she could place it, a nurse came in with a clipboard, all business and efficiency. Miss Chen, your vitals look good. We can discharge you within the hour, but we'll need someone to sign the paperwork and make sure you have a way home. Maria turned to Marcus, surprised he was still there. You didn't have to stay this whole time. I know, he said, but I did. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, placing it gently on her bedside table. Discharge is arranged. Your hospital bill has been covered. Maria froze. The world seemed to stop spinning for just a second. What? No, I can't. You don't have to, Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. It's done. Just take your daughter home and rest. Lily tilted her head, looking between them with that uncanny way children have of seeing right through to the truth of things. Is he your friend now, Mama? Maria looked at this man in his expensive coat who had seen her at her absolute worst, her most vulnerable, her most broken, and responded with nothing but quiet kindness and decisive action. She looked at her daughter and she said softly, he might be. As the nurse helped Maria into a wheelchair, hospital policy, even though she insisted she could walk, Maria turned once more to Marcus. Thank you, not just for tonight, for staying. He nodded once, then turned to leave. But just before he stepped through the door, he paused without turning around. Maria, he said quietly, the hospital where you used to work, it was St. Catherine's, wasn't it? She blinked in surprise. How did he know that? Yes. How did you? Just sounded familiar, he said, his tone carefully neutral. Take care of yourself. And then he was gone, leaving behind only questions and the strange lingering weight of his presence, like a door that hadn't quite closed all the way. The taxi dropped them home just before sunrise. Frost clung to the windows like tiny crystals. Maria unlocked the apartment door with trembling fingers, not from cold this time, but from exhaustion that went deeper than her bones. The moment they stepped inside, she smelled it. Metallic, sharp, blood. She paused at the kitchen doorway. The puddle had dried into a dark brown smear across the linoleum floor. The mop lay tipped over against the counter where she'd left it. A stark reminder of how close she'd come to something much worse, of how easily everything could have fallen apart. Maria moved quickly, ushering Lily toward the bedroom. Get changed, honey. I'll make us something warm. As soon as the bedroom door clicked shut, Maria dropped to her knees with a damp rag and began scrubbing. Each motion was quiet, focused, almost meditative. She didn't cry. She didn't let herself think. She just cleaned, erasing the evidence, restoring order to chaos, pretending that if she could just get the floor clean enough, everything would be okay again. Halfway through rinsing the cloth in the sink, 3 solid, deliberate knocks came at the door. Maria froze. Few people knocked on their door these days. Thomas would have called first. The landlord wouldn't bother at dawn. When she opened the door, Marcus stood there. No fancy coat this time, just a dark sweater under a blazer, looking somehow more human, more real. And in his hand, a paper bag. I brought some basic supplies, he said, holding it up. Antiseptics, gauze, pain medication. I wasn't sure what the hospital gave you. Maria stared at him, completely caught off guard. You didn't have to do this. I didn't do it for thanks, Marcus said simply. May I come in? Before Maria could answer, Lily appeared from the bedroom, her face breaking into an immediate, bright smile. "Hi, Mr. Marcus." Maria hesitated for only a heartbeat, then stepped aside. Marcus entered, placed the bag on the counter, and took a slow look around the small apartment. His eyes paused briefly on the partially clean kitchen floor, and Maria saw understanding flicker across his face. He knew what she'd been doing, knew what it meant. "I meant what I said at the hospital," he told her quietly. "Your daughter did something most adults wouldn't have the presence of mind to do." Maria leaned against the counter, arms crossed protectively across her chest. "She's strong. Has to be." A beat of heavy silence passed between them. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice quieter now, more careful. "St. Catherine's. That was your last job, wasn't it?" She nodded slowly, wondering where this was going, feeling something shift in the air between them. "I was head nurse in the oncology ward for 8 years. You left voluntarily?" And there it was, the question that opened the door to everything she'd tried to forget. "No," Maria said, and her jaw tightened with remembered anger and pain that hadn't dimmed even slightly with time. "I filed a formal complaint after a patient died. Equipment malfunction that no one wanted to admit to. The administrative board said it was an isolated incident. They pushed me out before I could take it further." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, and something changed in his expression. Sharpened. Focused. "Do you remember the specifics of the malfunction?" Her breath caught. Why would he want to know this? Why would a wealthy stranger care about something that happened years ago in a hospital system that had already forgotten her? A cardiac monitor failed during a chemo-related complication. The alert system never activated. We found the patient too late. By the time we got him to intensive care. Her voice trailed off. Some sentences don't need finishing. "Do you still have documentation?" Marcus asked. His tone carefully neutral, but something urgent underneath. Maria studied him for a long moment, really looked at him, trying to understand what was happening here. Why this man who had saved her life now wanted to dig into the worst moment of her career. "Why does this matter to you?" Marcus met her gaze directly. "Because that hospital received significant funding from a foundation I was once involved with, and the name St. Catherine's has appeared in more than one irregularity report over the past 2 years. I never looked into it closely until now." Something shifted in Maria's chest. A door she'd thought was locked forever, creaking open just slightly. Hope and fear mixed together in equal measure. She turned away, walked to the drawer near the refrigerator, the one where she kept important papers, and pulled out a brown manila envelope, sealed with tape, labeled in her careful handwriting. "Patterson case, September 28th. Incident report." She handed it to him. "I was going to submit it to the state medical board, but by then I was already being forced out. Human Resources accused me of falsifying records to cover my own mistakes. It never made it past legal review. They buried it completely. They buried me." Marcus opened the envelope with careful, deliberate movements. Inside were incident logs, screenshots of internal emails, equipment malfunction reports, and one printout circled in red ink, a delivery receipt for defective cardiac monitors, signed by the hospital's chief financial officer. He read the signature, and his entire body went still. "This signature. You saw this personally?" "No," Maria admitted, "but the CFO signed off on all major equipment purchases for our floor. I assumed he would have known about the defective units." Marcus's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. "I know this name. Gerald Crawford. He was involved in 2 of my early wellness initiative projects. Both went significantly over budget. Both shut down in under a year with nothing to show for the investment." He didn't say more. Didn't need to. The implication hung in the air between them like smoke, thick and choking. Gently, almost reverently, Marcus handed the file back to her. "Do you trust me enough to keep this? To investigate it properly?" Maria's gaze was steady and clear. "I don't trust easily anymore, but I trust facts. If you can do something with this information, quietly, without dragging Lily and me through public scrutiny, without turning us into victims all over again, then keep it." Lily appeared again, now dressed in completely mismatched pajamas, one leg purple, one leg green, holding a different stuffed animal. She looked up at her mother, then at Marcus, sensing something important happening, even if she couldn't quite understand it. "Can he stay for breakfast?" Maria let out a small laugh, the first real one in what felt like weeks. The tension in her shoulders loosened just a fraction. "Maybe next time, sweetheart. He has important work to do." Marcus gave Lily a rare half smile, and for just a moment, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. "Next time sounds really good." He turned back to Maria, all seriousness returning. "Someone buried this deliberately. Someone with reach and resources and connections. If I find anything concrete, anything at all, I'll let you know immediately. But if you remember more details, anything you haven't written down, call me directly." He handed her a simple black business card, no logo, no company name, just a phone number embossed in silver. And then, for the second time, Marcus Bennett walked out of Maria Chen's life. But this time, what he left behind wasn't just kindness or charity or the memory of being saved. This time, he left something dangerous and powerful and fragile. He left hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth didn't have to stay buried forever. Hope that maybe someone with power might actually use it for good. Hope that the system that had crushed her might finally face consequences. As the door closed softly behind him, Maria stood in her small kitchen, holding that black card in her hand, feeling something shift inside her chest. Something that had been frozen for years, slowly beginning to thaw. And in that moment, standing in her worn apartment with her daughter humming in the next room and dawn breaking outside her window, Maria Chen allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe everything might actually be okay. Sometimes that's where miracles begin, not with thunder and lightning, but with a whisper, a phone call, a stranger who decides to care, a card with a phone number, a door cracked open to let the light in. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. A second chance at belonging, Chapter 2, Fighting for Justice. You know what they say about opening old wounds? They say it hurts worse the second time because now you know exactly how much pain is coming. But sometimes you have to open those wounds anyway. Not because you want to, but because leaving them closed means the infection spreads. Sometimes the only way to heal is to bleed a little more first. This is the story of what happened when Maria Chen and Marcus Bennett decided to stop running from the past and turn around to face it head on. This is the story of what it costs to fight for justice when the whole system is designed to protect the guilty. And this is the story of how three people, a little girl, a mother, and a stranger, became something more powerful than any of them could have been alone. Because here's the truth that nobody tells you. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being absolutely terrified and doing the right thing anyway. Part 1. The investigation begins. Marcus Bennett didn't go home that night after leaving Maria's apartment. Home, that expensive penthouse with its perfect views and perfect furniture and perfect emptiness, held no appeal. Instead, he went to his office on the 40th floor of Bennett Tower, overlooking the frozen river that cut through downtown Philadelphia like a silver scar. The city lights cast cold reflections across the floor-to-ceiling windows. His coat was still on, forgotten. The folder Maria had given him lay open across his desk, and Marcus sat there reading it for the third time, fourth time, losing count. Each page was covered with her careful annotations. Time-stamped records, screenshots of internal emails, equipment logs, and signatures that didn't quite match the documented handwriting samples he'd already started pulling from other sources. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The building was utterly silent except for the low hum of servers several floors below and the occasional creak of metal from the heating vents adjusting to the cold. But Marcus's mind was anything but quiet. He wasn't thinking about quarterly earnings reports or investor presentations or the board meeting scheduled for next week about the company's new AI health diagnostic platform. He wasn't thinking about strategic partnerships or market positioning or any of the things that used to consume every waking moment. He was thinking about Maria, about the way her hands had trembled slightly when she passed him that envelope, but her eyes had stayed steady. The kind of steadiness that comes from being ignored and dismissed and disbelieved for so long that you stop wasting energy trying to convince people. You just hold on to the truth quietly, alone, waiting for someone, anyone, to finally listen. He was thinking about Connor Patterson, a 7-year-old boy he'd never met, who died because someone chose profit over safety. He was thinking about how many other Connor Pattersons there might be, how many other mothers left staring at hospital walls, wondering why no one would tell them the truth about what happened to their child. Marcus reached for his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice. "Vincent," he said as soon as the call connected, "I need a complete audit of the Westfield Medical Initiative, full grant history, including all subcontractors and subsidiary allocations. I need it tonight." Vincent Zhao, Marcus's most trusted investigator, former federal auditor, the kind of man who could find financial irregularities in a system designed to hide them, didn't argue or ask questions. He knew that tone in Marcus's voice, the one that meant this wasn't business. This was personal. "I'll start pulling everything now," Vincent said. "Should I flag anything specific?" "Equipment procurement, particularly anything involving St. Catherine's Hospital. And I want a full financial background on Gerald Crawford. Every company he's been connected to, every project he's touched, every signature on every document." "Understood. You'll have preliminary findings by morning." Marcus ended the call and leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing his eyes. He hadn't slept since the night of Lily's call, hadn't really rested properly in months, maybe years. Sleep had become something he scheduled between obligations rather than a natural human need. Something he did because the body required it, not because it brought any actual rest. A notification flashed on his computer screen. "Internal investigation file, CFO Westfield Health Initiative." He clicked it open. The name stared back at him in bold official type, Gerald Crawford. The name wasn't new to Marcus. Crawford had been the CFO on 3 separate wellness projects Marcus had personally invested in years ago, back when he was still building his reputation as a philanthropist who actually delivered results instead of just writing checks for tax purposes. 2 mobile health clinics meant to serve underserved communities, and a rural diagnostics pilot program that was supposed to bring quality health care to places where people drove 2 hours to see a doctor. All 3 had failed within 18 months. Budgets had ballooned inexplicably. Promised outcomes had evaporated like morning fog. Equipment had been substandard. Reports had been vague and bureaucratic and ultimately meaningless. At the time, Marcus had written them off as unfortunate market inefficiencies, the inevitable friction of trying to do good work in systems that were fundamentally broken. He'd moved on to other projects, other investments, other attempts to make a difference that wouldn't quite pan out the way he'd hoped. But the name appearing again now, connected to Maria's tragedy, connected to a child's death, that couldn't be coincidence. Not anymore. Another message arrived from Vincent. "Unusual payouts flagged. February 2022, $680,000, redirected to subsidiary registered as MedTech Solutions LLC." Marcus clicked through to the corporate profile. The silent partner listed on the LLC registration was Gerald Crawford. He closed the screen and stood, pacing to the window. Dawn was just beginning to break over the city, painting the sky in shades of gray and gold. Somewhere out there, people were waking up, making coffee, getting their kids ready for school, trusting that the systems meant to protect them actually worked. This wasn't negligence, Marcus realized. This was systematic, deliberate, calculated fraud. And someone had been paying consistently, methodically, to keep it quiet, to keep people like Maria silenced and discredited, to make sure that when nurses spoke up about defective equipment, they were the ones who lost their jobs, not the executives who'd signed off on purchasing that equipment in the first place. He picked up the phone again. This time he called her. The line rang twice before Maria's voice came through, groggy with sleep. "Hello? It's Marcus," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I know it's late. I wouldn't have called unless it was important." There was a pause. She didn't sound startled, just quiet and focused. "I'm listening." Marcus took a breath. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened the night of the monitor failure. Not the report you wrote, not the file you gave me. The real thing. The sequence of events, the conversations you had, what you saw, what you felt. I need you to walk me through it like you're living it again. Silence stretched between them across the phone line, heavy and weighted. Then Maria spoke, her voice steady despite the late hour and the painful memories she was being asked to resurrect. There was a boy, she said softly. Connor Patterson, 7 years old. Acute leukemia. The chemo had been hard on his heart and his blood counts were dangerously low. I told the attending physician we needed round-the-clock telemetry monitoring, not just standard pulse oximetry. She took a breath, and Marcus heard the weight of it, the years of carrying this story alone. But the telemetry unit they assigned to us, Unit 7B, had already flagged multiple malfunctions the week before. I reported it personally, filed a maintenance request, spoke to my supervisor, nothing changed. They said it was functioning within acceptable parameters. Then what happened? Marcus asked gently. Night shift. I was covering for another nurse who'd called in sick. Connor went into cardiac distress just after 2 in the morning. The alarm never sounded. Never. We only found out because his mother ran screaming into the hallway. She knew something was wrong before any of our equipment did. A mother's instinct was more reliable than thousands of dollars of medical technology. Maria's voice cracked slightly. We got him to ICU, but he coded. We worked on him for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of chest compressions and medications and praying and begging, and nothing worked. He was just gone. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more raw. They told me it was a tragic fluke, an unpredictable complication of his condition. But I saw the equipment logs afterward. The monitor had never registered his deterioration. It failed exactly the way I'd warned them it would. And when I tried to access the device report the next day to document everything, it had been altered. Key data was missing. Timestamps didn't match. Someone had cleaned it up. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Anger mixed with grim determination and a deep, burning sense of injustice. This wasn't about money for you, was it? No, Maria replied, her voice soft but fierce. It was about Connor's mother, about the look on her face when I had to tell her we'd done everything we could. That look has never left me, Marcus. Not for a single day. I see it every time I close my eyes. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence between them was full of shared understanding, shared grief for a child neither of them could save. Finally, Marcus said, "Thank you for trusting me with this. I believe you completely. And I'm going to make sure it never happens to another family. I promise you that." "I don't want revenge," Maria said, and there was something gentle but unshakable in her voice. "I want it to stop. I want the system to actually protect patients instead of protecting itself. I want other nurses to be able to speak up without losing everything. That's all I've ever wanted." "So do I," Marcus replied. Before he hung up, Maria said something that caught him completely off guard. "I didn't expect anyone to follow up on that file, especially not someone like you." Marcus's response was quiet, almost vulnerable. "Neither did I." He ended the call and returned to his desk. The city outside was waking up now, traffic beginning to flow through the streets, life continuing its relentless forward motion. But something had shifted for Marcus. Something fundamental. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was merely managing crises or cleaning up scandals or engaging in the kind of performative philanthropy that looked good in press releases but changed nothing. This was different. This mattered in a way that transcended balance sheets and public relations and quarterly reports. And he wasn't going to stop. Not until justice was served, not the kind announced in press conferences, but the real kind that actually changed lives and prevented future tragedies. 3 days later, Marcus sat across from Charles Morrison in a private conference room at the Westfield Foundation headquarters. The room was all dark wood and leather chairs, and the quiet, expensive hush of old money and institutional power. Charles was a seasoned board member, one of the original investors who had believed in Marcus's vision over a decade ago when he was just another ambitious tech entrepreneur with big ideas about disrupting healthcare. Charles had gray hair now, reading glasses that he adjusted frequently, and the patient, measured demeanor of someone who'd seen countless crises come and go. He flipped slowly through the printed documents Marcus had brought, and with each page his expression grew graver. Names, timestamps, financial transfer logs, screenshots of internal hospital dashboards showing equipment purchase orders and maintenance records that had been systematically altered. Email chains where people who should have known better chose to look the other way. At the end of the packet was a single-page letter, unsigned, dated 7 years ago, written by a nurse named Maria Chen, who had refused to look away when a child died due to equipment failure. A nurse who had tried to do the right thing and lost everything because of it. "You've been thorough," Charles said quietly, not looking up from the pages. "Maria kept this hidden for years," Marcus replied, his voice flat and controlled. "She tried to do the right thing through official channels. They destroyed her career for it, blacklisted her, made sure she'd never work in healthcare again." Charles finally lifted his eyes. Behind his reading glasses, they were troubled. "What does she want? Financial compensation? Reinstatement? A public apology?" "Nothing," Marcus said, and the simplicity of that answer hung in the air. "Absolutely nothing. She doesn't want money. She doesn't want her job back. She doesn't even want an apology. That's why I'm here." A long silence filled the room. Through the windows, Philadelphia continued its relentless rhythm, unaware that somewhere in this quiet conference room, the walls of a major healthcare funding initiative were beginning to crack. Charles spoke carefully, weighing each word. "Marcus, if even half of this is substantiated, we're not talking about a compliance error or administrative oversight. We're talking about criminal concealment. Funds deliberately misappropriated during investigations into patient fatalities. Systematic fraud spanning multiple facilities and years. This isn't just Crawford. This potentially touches everyone who signed off on these projects, everyone who looked the other way, everyone who accepted the official explanations without digging deeper." "I know," Marcus said. "Publicity like this won't just damage the Foundation's reputation. It could trigger lawsuits, class actions, federal investigations. It could destroy everything we've built over the past 15 years. Every good project, every successful initiative, all of it tainted by association." Marcus leaned forward, and there was something in his eyes that Charles had never seen before. Not anger exactly, but a kind of moral clarity that was almost frightening in its intensity. "Good," he said, his voice carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. "If what we built protects people like Crawford instead of people like Maria and Connor Patterson, then it deserves to be torn down completely. Better to burn it all and start over with integrity than keep propping up a system that kills children and punishes the people who try to stop it." Charles studied Marcus's face for a long moment. He seemed to see not just a sharp executive whose strategic brilliance had transformed healthcare technology, but something deeper. The man who had disappeared from headlines 2 years ago after a disastrous AI diagnostic rollout that had cost lives and reputation and nearly his sanity. The man who had been broken by his own good intentions gone wrong, and was now desperately trying to make sure someone else's good intentions weren't buried the same way. "You want to protect the nurse," Charles said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I want to protect what's left of decency in this system," Marcus replied, and his voice carried no dramatic heat, no theatrical passion, just low, steady determination, the kind that doesn't burn out because it's built on something deeper than emotion. "Maria spoke up once and lost everything. I won't let that pattern continue. Not again. Not on my watch." Charles closed the folder and slid it back across the polished table. He tapped 2 fingers thoughtfully on the cover, a gesture Marcus recognized as Charles thinking through complex problems with too many variables. "I'll start with the audit committee, but this stays completely confidential until we have clean verification from our legal team. If word leaks prematurely, if Crawford gets wind of this before we're ready—" "It won't," Marcus interrupted firmly. "I've already coordinated with Elena Rodriguez in compliance. She's standing by with redacted backup files. No digital trail that can be traced back to Maria. Her name stays protected until we're ready to move forward publicly, and even then, only if she consents." Charles let out a long breath that seemed to carry years of weariness. "You really don't sleep anymore, do you?" Marcus offered a thin smile with no humor in it. Not when good people suffer in silence while the guilty prosper. He stood, shook Charles's hand once with quiet intensity, and left without another word. There was nothing more to say. The wheels were in motion now. Truth, once set free, has a momentum all its own. That night, alone in his apartment, Marcus sat on the floor with the folder open before him. He didn't look at the financial data or the damning email chains or the altered equipment logs. He looked at Maria's letter, at the careful, almost painfully neat handwriting of a woman who had once believed in a system that never protected her in return. A woman who had done everything right and lost everything anyway. And he thought if Lily hadn't called the wrong number that night, none of this would have surfaced. The truth would have stayed buried. Gerald Crawford would have continued his schemes. More equipment would have failed, more patients would have died, more good people would have been silenced for trying to speak up. Marcus didn't believe in fate or divine intervention or the universe having a plan, but he believed in small chances, in moments of unexpected connection that could change everything if you were brave enough to follow where they led. And this time he absolutely would not waste the opportunity. The knock came just after 9 o'clock at night, 3 days after Marcus's meeting with Charles. Maria opened the door to find him standing there, coat unbuttoned, shadows under his eyes that spoke of exhaustion that went beyond mere sleeplessness. This was the weariness of someone carrying the weight of difficult truths, of discoveries that made the world seem darker and more complicated than it had any right to be. She stepped aside without speaking, somehow knowing this visit would be different. Lily was already in bed, the soft blue glow of her nightlight humming faintly from the next room, casting gentle shadows on the wall. In the small kitchen, Maria poured 2 cups of chamomile tea, the same kind she'd been making the night she collapsed. But she refused to let fear claim that small comfort, and slid one across the worn table toward Marcus. "You found something," she said. Not a question, a statement. Marcus nodded slowly, placing a thinner folder on the table between them. Somehow it felt heavier despite containing fewer pages. "Maria," he began, his voice low and serious, "I want you to come back, not to St. Catherine's, not as a floor nurse. I want you as an independent medical ethics advisor for the foundation. You're the only person who truly understands the inside of that system and isn't corrupted by it. You're the only one who can help us make sure we get this right." Maria didn't move. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. "No." Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting such an immediate, unequivocal rejection. "I haven't even explained the full scope of what we're—" "I don't need you to," she cut him off, her voice strained but controlled. "I lived it. I remember every hallway, every emergency shift, every patient name they erased from official reports, every conversation where I was told to stop making trouble. You think I don't want justice? I do. God, I do. But I also want to protect what's left of myself and my daughter." Silence spread between them like a fracture forming in ice, growing wider with each passing second. Marcus's voice softened, became almost pleading. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't genuinely believe you were the only person who could hold the truth together through what's coming. This is bigger than Crawford, Maria. Vincent found connections to other facilities, other equipment failures, other cases where people spoke up and were silenced. We need someone who understands how these systems work, how they hide things, how they protect themselves. We need you." "That's not fair," Maria whispered, her eyes suddenly bright with suppressed emotion. "You're asking me to walk back into the place that broke me, into the system that rewarded silence and punished honesty. Do you have any idea what it takes to escape something like that and stay sane? Do you know what it has to finally feel safe again, and then have someone ask you to throw yourself back into the fire?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't because he didn't know, not really, not in the way she did. His battles had been different, fought in boardrooms and through financial leverage and strategic maneuvering, not in the trenches of patient care where people lived and died based on whether equipment worked or not, where speaking up meant losing everything. It was Lily's voice that broke the heavy silence, small and uncertain, coming from the hallway where she stood in her pajamas, backlit by the glow of her nightlight. "Mom?" Maria turned quickly, her expression shifting from anguish to protective calm in an instant. You should be asleep, sweetheart. But Lily stepped forward, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, a different one than the panda, this one with one ear slightly torn, her bare feet padding softly on the cold floor. Her eyes moved between her mother and Marcus, sensing the tension in the room the way children always do, picking up on the undercurrents adults try to hide. If you help them, Lily asked, her voice small but clear, will the bad people stop hurting others? Maria's breath caught audibly in her throat. She looked at her daughter, the reason she'd stayed quiet all these years, the reason she'd wanted nothing more than a simple, peaceful life away from headlines and courtrooms and moral compromise and the brutal machinery of institutional healthcare that chewed up good people and spit them out. Then she looked at Marcus, who waited without pushing, his expression open and honest and quietly desperate. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, feeling something shift inside her. A door she'd kept firmly locked beginning to crack open, letting light into places that had been dark for so long. All right, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. Marcus didn't celebrate or express relief. He simply waited for her to continue, knowing there would be conditions. There were always conditions when you asked someone to risk everything. But I have requirements, Maria said, standing straighter now, finding her strength in the conviction of her boundaries. I don't do this for you. I don't do it for your foundation or your board members or your company's reputation. I do it for the patients who never got a second chance, for families like Connor Patterson's who deserve to know the truth, for every nurse who tried to speak up and got crushed for it. And when this investigation is over, when justice is served, if it's served, I walk away, completely. No string, no obligations, no expectations that I'll stay on in some permanent capacity. You get my help through this, and then I'm done. Forever. Marcus nodded once, respect clear in his eyes. That's all I hope for. Your integrity, your knowledge, and your voice, nothing more. You have my word. Later that night, sitting in his car outside the apartment building, Marcus called Vincent. She's agreed to help, he said simply. Vincent's response wasn't celebratory either. His voice was tight with tension. Then I hope she's prepared, Marcus. What I just pulled from MedTech Solutions' old shell company accounts links them to a second facility, a rural palliative care center in Vermont. Guess who signed off on the equipment transfer approval there? Marcus's grip tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He already knew the answer. Gerald Crawford. Exactly, Vincent confirmed. And it gets worse. I found references to at least 2 other facilities in the email chains. One in upstate New York, one in rural Virginia. We're not just looking at isolated embezzlement or one hospital's corruption. We're looking at systematic patient neglect for profit, spread across multiple states and facilities, operating for possibly 5 or 6 years at minimum. This is so much bigger than we initially thought. Marcus, this could be one of the largest healthcare fraud cases in recent history. Marcus sat in silence for a long moment, watching Maria's window where a single lamp still glowed against the darkness. The weight of what they were uncovering pressed down on him like physical pressure. Then he said quietly but with absolute determination, start building the complete map. Trace every financial connection, every equipment purchase, every patient incident that was reported and then mysteriously disappeared from official records. But keep Maria's name completely out of every report, every document, every file until we're ready to move forward publicly. She's been through enough. Already done, Vincent replied. I've created a separate identification system. She's listed as Source M in all documentation. No one outside our immediate circle will know her identity unless she chooses to reveal it. Inside the apartment upstairs, Maria sat at the small dining table long after Marcus had left. The folder he'd given her lay unopened in front of her. Her tea had gone cold, forgotten, a skin forming on its surface. She reached into the kitchen drawer, the same one where she'd kept the Patterson file for all these years, and pulled out her old hospital ID badge, the one she'd kept despite everything, unable to completely let go of who she'd once been, who she'd worked so hard to become. She stared at her younger face in the photo, at the hope in her eyes, remembering the idealism she'd carried into that profession. The belief that healthcare was about helping people, about being their advocate when they were most vulnerable. When had she lost that? Was it the night Connor died? Or was it gradual, worn away by 1,000 small compromises and disappointments? Then she put the ID down and reached instead for the red spiral notebook book she kept hidden beneath Lily's coloring books, the one containing her own notes, charts, patient initials, everything she'd documented over the years that didn't make it into official reports, everything she'd once thought about burning in a moment of despair and defeat, when it seemed like keeping the evidence only meant keeping the pain alive. She opened to the first page and began writing, adding new observations, documenting her memories with fresh eyes, rewriting history, but this time with absolutely no intention of hiding it, no fear of consequences, no careful self-censorship to protect her career. Just truth, clear and uncompromising and sharp as a scalpel. The fight wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But for the first time in years, Maria Chen felt like she was finally moving forward instead of simply surviving. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing her ground. And in that small apartment, under the glow of a single lamp while her daughter slept peacefully in the next room, a woman who had lost everything began the slow, painful work of reclaiming not just her voice, but justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Over the following weeks, the investigation gathered momentum like a snowball rolling downhill, growing larger and more powerful with each new piece of evidence uncovered. Vincent worked 18-hour days, pulling financial records and cross-referencing equipment, purchases, and building a web of connections so complex it took 3 whiteboards in Marcus's private office to map it all out. Gerald Crawford's name appeared again and again, connected to shell companies and subsidiaries and silent partnerships that existed only on paper but somehow managed to bill hundreds of thousands of dollars for services that were never actually provided. Maria, true to her word, joined the effort. She came to Marcus's office twice a week, always in the evening, after Lily was asleep, always staying for exactly 2 hours, no more. She reviewed documents with the practiced eye of someone who knew how hospitals worked, who understood the coded language of medical bureaucracy, who could spot the places where records had been altered or information had been conveniently omitted. She was brilliant at it, tireless and meticulous and absolutely uncompromising in her insistence on accuracy. If they were going to do this, she told Marcus repeatedly, they were going to do it right. No shortcuts, no assumptions, nothing that couldn't be proven with documentation. Charles and the audit committee worked in parallel, conducting their own investigation through official channels, being careful to maintain confidentiality while they built their case. The foundation's lawyers reviewed everything, flagging potential legal issues, preparing for the firestorm they knew was coming. And slowly, piece by piece, the true scope of Gerald Crawford's operation became clear. He'd been doing this for at least 6 years, possibly longer, using his position as CFO to approve purchases of defective or substandard medical equipment from companies he secretly owned or had financial stakes in, billing the foundation and hospitals for premium equipment while delivering inferior products, altering maintenance records to hide repeated failures. And when those failures led to patient harm or death, making sure that anyone who tried to speak up was discredited, silenced, or pushed out entirely. The Rural Palliative Care Center in Vermont had experienced 3 patient deaths related to equipment failures in a single year. A community clinic in upstate New York had filed multiple complaints about defective diagnostic equipment before mysteriously withdrawing those complaints after the lead physician was forced to resign. The pattern was there once you knew to look for it, consistent, methodical, devastating. Maria cried only once during those weeks, the night Vincent presented a list of patient incidents they'd uncovered. 18 names, 18 people whose deaths or serious injuries could be potentially linked to equipment failures in facilities where Crawford had signed off on purchases. 18 Connor Pattersons. Marcus found her in the small conference room, staring at the list with tears streaming silently down her face. He didn't say anything. He just sat beside her and waited. "I thought it was just Connor," she finally whispered. "I thought I was the only one who knew. But there were others, so many others, and nobody said anything. Nobody stopped it. "We're stopping it now," Marcus said quietly. "Because of you. Because you kept that file. Because you refused to let the truth die, even when it cost you everything. These 18 people, their families will finally know what happened. Other people will be protected. You did this, Maria." She shook her head. "We did this. You believed me when nobody else did." And in that moment, in that small conference room with its fluorescent lights and institutional furniture, something shifted between them. Not romantic exactly, though there was that too underneath. Something deeper, recognition, understanding. Two people who had both been broken by systems they'd tried to serve, finding in each other the strength to fight back. 41 hours after Charles and the audit committee submitted their findings to the Foundation's board of directors, a notice was posted in the executive channel. Gerald Crawford, suspended indefinitely pending internal and federal investigation. The Foundation issued no press release. There was no dramatic announcement. But within the healthcare community, word spread quickly. Federal investigators were brought in. The FBI started looking into wire fraud and conspiracy charges. Other hospitals and facilities began reviewing their own equipment records, finding similar patterns. It was like pulling a single thread and watching an entire corrupt tapestry unravel. Maria was in Marcus's office when the suspension notice came through. She read it once, then closed her laptop and sat very still. "Are the machines still being used?" she asked. "The defective ones. Are patients still being monitored by equipment that could fail?" Marcus shook his head. "They were pulled 2 days ago. Every single unit flagged by Vincent's audit has been removed from service across all affected facilities. Patients have been moved to verified equipment. We made sure of that first before anything else." "You did that," she said quietly. "We did that," he corrected. She turned to him then, and her expression was complicated. Relief mixed with exhaustion, mixed with something that might have been peace, or at least the beginning of it. "Then I'm done," she said simply. Marcus blinked. "You mean?" "I mean I'm not going back to hospitals. Not to boards, not to policies, not to compliance meetings or oversight committees or any of it. I gave too much of myself to systems that swallow people whole. I won't do it again. This was what I needed to do and I did it. Now I'm choosing peace." Marcus took a breath, started to respond, then paused. He'd prepared a whole speech, a formal offer to stay on as an independent auditor, flexible schedule, full benefits, triple what she'd made before. The kind of offer that would be insulting to refuse because of how generous it was. But looking at her face, he understood. This wasn't about money or recognition or career rehabilitation. This was about a woman reclaiming her right to define success on her own terms. "I understand," he said simply. "Thank you for everything you have done. For Connor. For all of them." Maria nodded once, stood and gathered her things. At the door, she paused. "What about you?" she asked. "What comes next for Marcus Bennett?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought I did. I thought I had my whole life mapped out, every step planned. But lately I've been thinking maybe the plan is the problem. Maybe sometimes you just have to stop trying to control everything and see where life takes you." She smiled then, genuine and warm. "That sounds terrifying." "It is," he agreed. "Absolutely terrifying." "Good," she said. "The best things usually are." It was Thursday night late, the kind of night when most people were home in their warm houses, safe and content. Rain tapped softly against the windows, barely audible above the low hum of the city that never quite sleeps. Marcus stood outside Maria's apartment building, a single bag of takeout in one hand. He'd been standing there for 5 minutes, trying to decide if this was a good idea or a terrible one, unable to convince himself either way. Finally, he climbed the stairs and knocked. 3 times, steady and sure. The door opened. Lily stood there, wrapped in a cardigan 2 sizes too big, grinning like she'd been expecting him. "You're late," she whispered conspiratorially. "I know," Marcus said, stepping inside. "I'm sorry." In the small kitchen, warm light pooled over old countertops that had seen 1,000 meals, 1,000 conversations, 1,000 small moments of life lived simply and genuinely. Maria stood at the stove, barefoot, hair tied back, no makeup, stirring something that smelled like garlic and tomatoes and home. She turned and saw him. Their eyes met. No dramatic music, no sweeping declarations, no movie-perfect moment, just silence. The kind that meant something had shifted between them, not just in the room, but in them individually. A recognition that whatever this was, it mattered. Marcus spoke first. "I didn't come to change your life," he said quietly. Maria nodded once, waiting. "I came because I think I need mine to be changed." Her breath hitched slightly, just a little, barely noticeable unless you were watching closely, which he was. "I don't know what this is," Marcus continued, his voice soft and honest and uncertain, in a way he'd never been in business, never been in his carefully constructed public persona. "But if you're still willing, I'd like to stay a little longer this time. Not as someone trying to save you or fix anything or solve problems. Just stay, if that's okay." Maria didn't rush to reply. She didn't throw herself into his arms or declare her feelings or do any of the things that would happen if this were fiction instead of real life, messy and complicated and uncertain. Instead, she reached into the drawer, pulled out a second wooden spoon, and handed it to him. "Then stir this," she said, gesturing to the pot on the stove. "Don't let it burn. It's harder than it looks." He laughed, surprised by the simplicity of it, the ordinariness, the beautiful mundane reality of what she was offering. No grand declarations, no dramatic endings, just a beginning, just an invitation to be part of something real. Sophie giggled from the table where she sat with her coloring books. "He doesn't know how to cook, Mama." "Then I'll teach him," Maria said, smiling, "if he's willing to learn." Marcus took the spoon and moved to stand beside her at the stove, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The scent of garlic and thyme and possibility rose between them, filling the small kitchen with warmth. And in that moment, standing in a modest apartment with rain softening against the windows, stirring sauce with a woman who'd seen him at his most desperate to help and most uncertain about everything else, with a little girl doing homework at the table behind them, Marcus Bennett understood what he'd never been able to buy or build or control or strategically plan. Belonging, not as a savior or a hero or a wealthy benefactor or a CEO with all the answers, just as someone invited to stay, someone welcomed into the everyday sacred space of a simple life lived with intention and love, a place at the table, a place to begin again, and two people willing to begin with him, no questions asked, no credentials required, just the honest offer of companionship and the slow, patient work of building something real. In that modest apartment above a closed electronics shop, with the city humming outside and the future completely uncertain, a man who once had everything finally found something that actually mattered. A home. Not a house or a penthouse or a place marked by price tags and square footage, but a home in the truest sense. A place where you're known completely and welcomed anyway. Where you can be uncertain and imperfect and still learning. Where there's always room for one more at the table if they're willing to help stir the sauce and listen to a 7-year-old explain her drawings and be patient with the beautiful, ordinary mess of real human connection. And sometimes that's where the best stories end. Not with grand finales or perfect resolutions, but with quiet beginnings, with second chances, with wrong numbers that turn out to be exactly right, with the slow, steady work of building justice and building love and building a life worth living one simple moment at a time. The fight for justice would continue. Gerald Crawford would face charges. The system would be forced to reckon with its failures. Lives would be changed, policies would be reformed, and Connor Patterson's death, along with those 18 others, would finally mean something beyond tragedy. But that night in that kitchen, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that 3 people who'd found each other by accident were choosing, deliberately and with open eyes, to become something more than strangers. They were choosing to become family. And sometimes that's the only miracle we really need. Thank you for staying with this story from beginning to end. If this journey moved you, touched your heart, or made you think differently about courage and justice and second chances, remember, small acts of kindness can change the world. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up for a stranger. Sometimes justice begins with one person refusing to stay silent. And sometimes the wrong number is exactly the call you were meant to make. This is a story about hope, about fighting for what's right even when it costs you everything, about strangers who become friends, who become family, about little girls who save lives by being brave, about mothers who refuse to let truth die, and about broken people who find healing by helping others heal. May we all be a little more like Lily, brave enough to ask for help, like Maria, strong enough to fight back, like Marcus, wealthy enough in spirit to use whatever power we have for good. And may we all answer when the phone rings, even if we're not the person they meant to call, because sometimes being the wrong number is exactly right.